So I turned 18 about 4 months ago, and 6 months before that, my dad made me leave our house. This happened because my older half-brother Jake, who's 25, decided he wanted to move back in with our dad. Jake didn't want to rent his own place like most people do. Instead, he chose to live with my dad. To give you a bit of background, Jake is my dad's son from his first relationship. Jake's mom and my dad split up right after he was born, and they didn't really stay in touch much after that. Even though Jake and his mom weren't very close, he ended up being closer to our dad. We all grew up together because Jake used to visit us a lot, way more than he was actually supposed to, according to the custody rules. Officially, he was supposed to spend half the month with our dad, but it felt like he was always there. Or maybe I felt like Jake was always around because I really didn't like hanging out with him. My dad kind of pushed us to spend time together, which didn't help. Plus, I'm pretty sure Jake wasn't a fan of me either. He kind of saw me as competition or something. A couple of years ago, my mom died after a long fight with lung cancer, and that's when things with my dad really started to go south. To be honest, things between me and my dad have never been great, even when I was little. It's like he wasn't sure he wanted a kid, especially not one like me. He always acted kind of odd around me, almost like he wished I wasn't there most of the time. My dad was always pretty tough on me, getting mad and yelling over tiny things. He wasn't the type to show much affection either. No matter how hard I tried to get on his good side, all I got back was coldness. But everything was different when Jake was around. It was like my dad turned into the world's best father then, doing all the fun stuff with Jake that I always wished he would do with me. Despite how obvious it was that Jake and I didn't get along, my dad still pushed us to spend time together. Jake saw me as a threat, and I couldn't stand him because he used to bully me all the time when we were younger. He always seemed to pick fights with me and push me around just because he could. It was really tough dealing with that kind of behavior all the time. Jake knew he could get away with pushing me around because my dad never stood up for me. If I tried to tell my dad that Jake was being too rough, he'd just shrug it off and tell me to suck it up, that this was just how boys played. He made it clear he didn't want me growing up soft. I started to believe that enduring this was what my dad expected of me, so I just stopped complaining and let it happen. I never fought back against Jake because I didn't want to make my dad angry. I knew that arguing or standing up to Jake was a surefire way to get yelled at by my dad. It didn't even matter if Jake was actually messing things up for me. Any fight between us would automatically put me in the wrong in my dad's eyes. It always seemed like no matter what happened, I was the one to blame in my dad's eyes. I was always the bad guy in any story. It was painfully clear that my dad had a favorite, and it definitely wasn't me. He never seemed to find it strange or wrong that Jake, who was 6 years older than me, was picking on me. As we got older, Jake changed his tactics. He stopped using physical force so much. Maybe he realized it wasn't working as well anymore, or perhaps he was just growing up. When he entered high school, he started using a new method. He got his friends involved and began bullying me socially. Up until then, school had been my refuge. I was still in elementary school, and since we were in different buildings when he was in middle school, he couldn't reach me there. But once he started high school, even that safe space started to feel threatening. Once I moved up to middle school, we were in the same building, and things got even worse. Jake and his friends started ganging up on me, constantly making fun of me. They didn't stop at just teasing. They spread nasty rumors about me, too. They told everyone that I was mentally challenged, labeling me as Jake's idiotic little younger brother. And, unfortunately, that label stuck. They even used slurs when they referred to me. This made things incredibly tough, especially at an age when everyone is starting to really care about their reputation. Middle school is tough because everyone wants to fit in, and these rumors about me being not cool spread so fast. Even my friends from elementary school started avoiding me, worried about their own reputations, so I ended up feeling pretty alone and isolated. It wasn't until Jake graduated that I finally had the school to myself and could exist in peace. I did have a couple of friends, but most people just believed them, and I would let them get away with it because I was so exhausted from putting up a fight all the time that I couldn't even bear to argue with people at home. Things were just as bad as ever because Jake and my father would never pass up on an opportunity to put me down and make me feel like an idiot. And the funniest part was that I wasn't even an idiot. I had pretty decent grades and I was great at science and stuff. But my dad, Jake, didn't care about that. Jake was a football player, and the cherry on top of that, he was actually a pretty great student as well. See, you guys can imagine how bad things must have been for me at home. Jake was everything that I was not academically strong, and just the kind of son that my father had wanted. On the other hand, there was me, who was average in every sense of the word. They never missed an opportunity to remind me of just how insignificant and average I was. My mother tried to defend me most of the time, But my dad was a real sweet talker, and he would convince my mother that they were just messing around with me and they didn't mean anything that they said. My mother was generally a nice and sweet person, but she was also really in love with my father, so she never saw him for what he truly was. She would try her best to defend me, and I appreciated her for that. But it didn't work because it wasn't enough for my father. Along with Jake, continued to bully me for as long as they could. And then finally Jake went away to college and I felt like I could breathe a sigh of relief. My dad would still be around, but he was significantly less annoying to deal with when the other jerk wasn't with him. But before I could find out what it was like to live with my parents without Jake constantly picking on me, my mother was diagnosed with lung cancer. It was incredibly difficult for us to come to terms with it because we felt like our world had shattered. The only thing that my father and I had in common was that both of us loved my mother dearly, so her diagnosis really broke us both. But instead of making our family stronger, my dad decided that he was going to make the worst of this. My mother was already suffering, but now, instead of my father and I putting up a brave front for her, he started distancing himself from her even more early on. He would at least speak to me only if it was to take digs at me. But after my mom's diagnosis, he stopped doing even that and started pretending like I didn't exist at all. I can cut him some slack for that, because both of us were suffering, and he just chose to deal with the suffering in a different way. I would have preferred if my mom's predicament brought us closer together somehow, but clearly that was not meant to be. And even if it was meant to be, my dad was the kind of person who would make sure that it didn't happen because for some reason, he just hated me and couldn't bear the thought of me being happy with time. My mom's condition only got worse, and my dad's temper also started taking a toll on me because he would either not speak to me at all and ignore me completely, or he would be absolutely nasty to me. And there were several occasions where he almost made me cry because of how rude he was being. I tried my best to keep the peace of the family by not responding to my father because I knew that it would just give him more of a reason to berate me and pick on me for the years that my mother was sick. Whenever Jake would come back home from college, he would lay off of me, and I appreciated that he would not be nice to me, but he would at least be human. And that's more than what I could ask for. Things were bad when my mother was still around, but after she passed away, I went from the frying pan into the fire for the first couple of months after my mother's passing. Things were really quiet around the house, and by that I mean that I would do all the work. While my dad was just unresponsive, he would function, he would go to work, come back and have dinner and stuff, but nothing else. I was kind of concerned for him, and I contacted my grandparents several times to tell them that I thought my father was probably depressed. But they didn't take me seriously. They either didn't care enough about their son to check up on him after the funeral, or they just didn't like me, just like my father, and didn't want to do as I said. But after a few months had passed, my father started coming to his normal self. Unfortunately, that also included binge drinking and making me feel like crap about myself yet again. He would constantly order me to do stuff around the house, and it was really tiring because not only was I going to school, but I was also doing all the work around the house, which my mother used to do earlier. Even when she was sick, my dad and I would manage to get all the work done. But after her passing, all that responsibility came to me. I couldn't even protest because if I did, my father would tell me that I wasn't bringing home any money. So this is the least I could do to live here. It was really insulting, but I had nowhere else to go, so I just had to suck it up and deal with it for the longest time. The only thing that I was looking forward to was going to college, because that would mean that I would finally be rid of my father, and I wouldn't have to come back home anyway. I didn't even consider this place home anymore because once my mom was gone, it stopped being home for me. Now I could have moved out and started living with my mom's parents after her, but they live really far away and I still had a year of school left, so that was not an option for me. But then, a couple of months ago, when my father found out that his golden child would be coming back home, he kicked me out anyway, and I ended up moving to live with my grandparents. Jake had moved out for college a couple of years ago, but he hadn't returned to live here after that. After he had graduated, he got a job there and decided to stay because his girlfriend wanted to stay there and make a life for themselves away from home. So Jake decided to stay there with her and would only come back for the holidays occasionally. About 2 years ago, he got married to his girlfriend because she was pregnant. They had just graduated when they found out, and it seemed like pretty perfect timing, so they decided to get married. I was invited to the wedding, surprisingly, and just for that one day, he did not terrorize me. My mother was also present that in spite of her condition, because even though he didn't like it, everybody liked my mom, and he wasn't particularly close to his own mother since she was kind of a bad mom. And I'm saying this because she was the kind of mother who just didn't care about their kid or having a relationship with their child. The woman was already in her fourth marriage by the time Jake got married, and it honestly appeared to me that her goal in life was to be rich. She worked and earned her own money, no doubt, but that was at the cost of her relationship with her son. I guess that explains why Jake was so attached to her father. He pretty much only had one parent who cared about him, and of course, he didn't want to share that parent with me. Anyway, Dad got married and soon after he had a kid as well. They have been living happily there for the past 2 years, but I don't know why. For some reason, 6 months ago, they decided to move back. My dad just informed me about it, like 2 weeks before Jake was supposed to come home. He was really smug about it as well, and he sat me down one day and told me that I needed to find a place to live because Jake would be coming back home and I had to give up my room. We had 3 bedrooms, so I asked him why they couldn't just use the guest room. So he told me that Jake and his wife were going to live in the guest room and they were going to use my room as the nursery. It was apparently imperative that I leave the house because I was already enough since I was going to be an adult in just a few months. I thought it was really unnecessary and selfish of my father to demand that I leave the house altogether just because I wanted to move back here with his family. I tried to fight with my father, but there was no talking to him because he had already made up his mind. He told me that I had 2 weeks to clear out, and after that, if I didn't leave, then he would call the cops on me. Now, I'm aware that there must have been some legal way to fight this and prevent it from happening. But at the time, it didn't occur to me, and I was really panic-stricken because I didn't trust my father, and I knew that he was fully capable of kicking me out without notice. So I started rushing to find a place for myself, but eventually I settled on moving in with my grandparents. I had avoided doing that so far because they lived so far away, and I still had to go to school. But at the time, I just didn't have any other options, and they were just a couple of weeks of high school left at that point anyway, so I was willing to take that risk. Within days, I had moved out because I didn't want to be there when Jake came back home with his wife and child. My father didn't seem to care when I moved out, and didn't even say goodbye to me the day that I had packed up and I was leaving with the movers. My grandparents had come all the way to pick me up in their truck, and they had half a mind to tear into my father. But I told them not to do it because it just wasn't worth the drama. 6 months have passed since that day, and I have been living with my grandparents. I haven't been in touch with my father ever since he kicked me out, and I didn't plan on getting back in touch with him either. I was supposed to start college in a couple of weeks, and that was already going to be taken care of. I had literally no incentive to speak to my dad or Jake ever again, but unfortunately, they were the ones who had to reach out to me because something had happened, and they now needed me to bail them out. They visited me a couple of days ago, and I was quite surprised because I hadn't been expecting them to reach out to me at any point. But my grandparents still let the man and I decided to have a conversation with them because they seemed pretty desperate. I found out that apparently the reason Jake had come back here with his family was because he had lost his job earlier and was struggling to make rent. So he made the difficult choice of coming back here. His wife was all right with it because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom and didn't want to work until their kid was a little older. So this was their best bet. When they came back, they expected to find work easily. But that was not the case because literally none of the companies around were hiring right now, and people with Jake's skill set were extremely common. So it wasn't as if he was a standout candidate either. But somehow my father managed to get him a job in the company that he works in. Neither of them were happy about it because it paid a little less than what Jake used to make before, but that was all they had, so they had to make the best of their situation. But as it turns out, Jake had been stealing from the company for a couple of months now, and it had finally come to light a few weeks ago. And now my father and Jake are both in trouble because their employers think that they were in cahoots and threatening to file a lawsuit against them if they don't return the money soon enough. The only reason that they haven't been sued yet is because it's a family business, and the CEO of the company used to be a great friend of my mom's. It's only out of respect for her that he hasn't filed a lawsuit against them yet for embezzlement, but he's not going to hold out for longer. And my father and Jake wanted me to help them out. They wanted me to claim that they needed the money for my college fund, which is why they had been stealing, and it was not for their own personal gain. My father believed that this would make him take it easy on us and buy them some time to return the money. They would still get fired, but at least they wouldn't end up going to prison because of this. They were counting on me to help them out and paint the perfect picture of being a poor little victim. I couldn't believe that they had the audacity to ask something like this of me after the way they had treated me my entire life. I said no, almost instantly without even considering it, because it was a crazy idea, and I was pretty sure that it was not going to work. Their plan was simply ridiculous, and I didn't want to be a part of it. When I told them that I didn't want to be a part of that plan, they started getting really agitated and told me that I had to help them out because there was a very real chance that they might end up going to jail, and I couldn't let some petty grudge from years ago ruin their lives. So I told them that it wasn't a petty grudge, and it certainly wasn't from years ago. My father had only recently kicked me out. I hadn't even been a year since then, so I would say that it was pretty recent. But that wasn't even the main reason that I didn't want to help them. I just thought that their plan was really dishonest. And I actually happened to know the guy that my dad worked for. Like I said, my mother and he were really good friends, and he also seemed to like me. Him and my mother had pretty much grown up together, and I used to refer to him as my uncle whenever he would come around, when my mom was still alive. Even at her funeral, we had a nice conversation and we liked each other. My mom was actually the one who had told him to give my father a job in his company when my dad had been struggling. But instead of being thankful, not only had Jake decided to try and make a fool out of these people, but my dad was now trying to cover it all up and use me as a shield. I thought that it was really low and I couldn't in good conscience be a part of this. So I told them that it would be in their best interest if they just tried to pay off whatever amount they had stolen instead of trying to cover it up with more lies and stuff. Because I wasn't going to be on their side here, and they might end up going to jail if they tried to for him again. In fact, they should even have been grateful that they were being given a chance to pay that money off and get out of this without a lawsuit that they would most definitely lose and that would ruin their future because they would definitely go to jail for it. They had no idea just how easy things were for them right now, and exactly how complicated they could become if they decided to go through with their crazy plan. I tried to explain that to them, but my dad got really mad and said that he wasn't here to listen to a sermon from me, and if I wanted to help them, then I would agree to that plan. Instead of giving them advice that meant absolutely nothing. So I told him that I wasn't going to be a part of this. And to my surprise, my dad actually started crying. I had never seen this happen before, and it made me feel really uncomfortable. He told me that he had been counting on me because I was his son. At the end of the day, no matter what has happened in the past, he knew that he would have helped me out if I was in a situation like this. He said that he expected the same of me because this was a huge deal, and he really didn't want to go to prison. Jake also had the same sentiment, and he was begging me to help them out because he knew that I was well. I liked it that among my mom's friends, I was the only one who could bail them out. My mom would have made this much easier, but since she was gone, I was the next best person to deal with it, and they were banking on me. It was difficult, but I still had to turn them down, and I tried to encourage them to just come clean and repay the money that they owed. They got really upset and said that the only reason I was screwing them over was because they used to mess with me when I was little, and they were really disappointed with how I was dealing with things now. They left after that, but I keep thinking about it and the guilt is eating away at me because I keep imagining them in jail. And I don't know, it just doesn't feel right. But at the same time, I don't want to be a part of something illegal and so immoral. It would be an insult to my mother as well, because I would technically be using her friendship and manipulating a really good friend of hers. I'm really conflicted right now about what I should do, and time is of the essence at the moment because it's not like my dad and Jake have forever to pay off their debts. So it's for not wanting to lie and cover up for my dad and my half-brother, who bullied me my entire life. Update 1. Okay, let's really break it down and make it super clear. So, I've thought long and hard about this situation with my dad and Derek, and I've decided that I'm definitely not going to help them out with their problem. Here's exactly why I made this decision. First off, what they're doing is not just a little bit wrong, it's seriously bad. It's not only morally wrong, which means it goes against what's right and fair, but it's also unethical, meaning it breaks the rules of good behavior. And on top of all that, it's completely illegal, which means it breaks the law and could get them, and potentially me, into serious trouble with the authorities. I really don't want to get involved in anything like this because it goes against everything I believe in. Doing something that could hurt other people or that is dishonest just isn't something I'm comfortable with. And honestly, getting tangled up in illegal stuff could mess up my future too. Now, my dad and Derek, they're not in some kind of life-threatening situation. They aren't cornered with no way out. They actually have a clear opportunity to make things right. They've been caught, sure, but they've also been given a chance to fix their mistake. All they need to do is return the money Derek took. It's their responsibility to sort out this mess they've made. By doing this, they can avoid bigger consequences like going to jail, and they can also save their reputations from getting even worse. So, seeing all this, I've decided to stay out of it. They need to handle this on their own, and I'll just keep to doing what I know is right. This way, I keep my hands clean and stay out of trouble, while they deal with the consequences of their actions. It's tough, but it's the best decision for me. My dad and Derek have gotten themselves into a bit of a mess by taking money that wasn't theirs. The good news for them, and for me, is that they can actually fix this mess all by themselves. They just need to give back the money they took. Because they can solve this on their own, I don't have any reason to feel bad or guilty for not helping them out. A bunch of people have given me advice on this, and pretty much everyone said it would be best for me to stay out of the whole situation. They didn't say this just because my dad and Derek haven't been very nice, but also because what they're doing, taking money that isn't theirs, is really, really wrong. It's the kind of wrong that sticks with you, you know? Like, if I helped them, I'd probably feel awful about it later, because deep down, I'd know it wasn't the right thing to do. My dad and Derek might be able to forget about this and move on, but I'm not like that. If I did something this bad, I'd keep thinking about it and feeling terrible. So by choosing not to help them, I'm actually doing what's best for me too. I get to keep my conscience clear and not get tangled up in their problems, which means I can move on and feel good about my choice. That's why I'm sticking to my decision to stay out of it and let them handle their own mess. Basically, it's pretty clear that me, my dad, and Derek are very different people when it comes to what we think is okay and what's not okay. I'm not cool with doing things that feel wrong, and that's why I've decided to stay out of the trouble they're in. They did something bad, and it's up to them to fix it. Now, I've already blocked them on my phone and all the social media I use because I don't want them dragging me into their problems. But I wouldn't put it past them to try some sneaky stuff, like using different phone numbers or making new accounts to try to reach me. If that happens, I'm going to block those too. I just really don't want any part of this mess. And you know what? My grandparents back me up on this. They also think I'm doing the right thing by keeping out of the situation. They agree that this is a mess my dad and Derek made by themselves, so they need to be the ones to fix it. After all the rough times and the way they've treated me, it doesn't make any sense for them to expect me to help them now. It's like, why would I want to get involved in cleaning up their mess after they've been so unfair to me for so long? So I'm sticking to my decision to stay away from this whole thing and let them handle it on their own. Update 2. Hey, so something happened today, just like I kind of expected it would. It's been about a week and a day since the last time I saw my dad, and we haven't talked at all since then. Today, out of nowhere, he tried to get in touch with me. But here's the thing. He didn't just call me from his usual number. He used a different one that I didn't recognize, so I didn't immediately know it was him. So I answered the phone without thinking it was anything big, but as soon as I heard my dad's voice, I hung up the phone super fast. I just didn't want to talk. But I guess I wasn't quick enough to block this new number because he managed to send me a text before I could stop him, and I ended up seeing his message. It's kind of sneaky, right? Using a different number to try and talk to me, hoping I wouldn't realize it was him at first. I'm trying to keep my distance for now, so it was a bit annoying that he found a way to get through to me. But now I know, and I'll make sure to block this new number too, so I don't get surprised like that again. So, here's what went down with the text message from my dad. He tried to explain in his message that he knew I didn't want to talk about their problems anymore, but things had gotten really serious for him and Jake. According to him, their boss is super upset about some money they owe him, and he's been pressuring them every day. He even threatened to sue them if they don't pay him back. Hearing all that did make me feel pretty guilty, like maybe I should help out. But I had to stick to what I feel is right. So I replied to him and was straight up about it. I told him I wasn't going to help them with money or get involved. I suggested that they should really focus on fixing the problem themselves instead of trying to avoid it. After sending that message, I blocked him. I hope he gets where I'm coming from with this decision. Even if he doesn't quite understand why I'm staying out of it, I just really hope he takes my advice and does the right thing. Honestly, the last thing I want is for my dad to end up in jail. That would be really tough, but I also know that they need to face up to what they've done and handle it themselves. Update 3. Hey there! So, here's the latest update on the whole situation with my dad and everything. I haven't heard anything from my dad since I blocked him, but my grandparents have been trying to figure things out on their side. They decided to reach out to someone who could really give us the scoop, my mom's friend, who just so happens to be a big deal CEO. They thought he'd have the inside info since he's kind of involved, too. We didn't want to bug him too much because he's super busy, and we don't want to be those people who keep calling all the time. But things are pretty serious, and we really needed to know what was going on, especially since talking to my dad or Jake isn't an option for me anymore. So my grandpa decided to give him a call. When he talked to him, the CEO was pretty clear. He's still on track to sue my dad and Jake if they don't return the money they owe him in the next couple of months. He's not messing around, and it sounds like he means business. So, that's where things stand right now. We're just waiting to see what happens next, hoping for the best, but prepared for whatever might come. He mentioned that because he was such good friends with my mom, he really wanted to let the whole thing slide and not make a big deal out of it. But even though he's trying to be cool about it, he explained that he just can't write off the money my dad and Jake owe as a total loss. So he's still planning to go ahead with the lawsuit if they don't pay him back soon. And you know what? I actually really respect him for how he's handling things. He's being a lot more forgiving than most people would be if they were in his shoes. He could be a lot tougher on them, but he's trying to be fair because of his old friendship with my mom. He even apologized to me directly. He said he was sorry that all this drama was affecting me. I told him it was no big deal, though. I don't live with my dad anymore. And to be honest, it feels like my dad kind of brought this on himself. It's tough, but sometimes you just have to face the consequences of your actions, you know? Hey, so right now we're all kind of in a wait and see mode. We're not totally sure what's going to happen next, but I have a feeling that my dad knows what's at stake here. He's pretty smart when it comes to figuring things out, and I think he realizes that he needs to pay back the money to avoid serious trouble like ending up in jail. It might take some time, but I'm confident that they'll find a way to sort it out. And honestly, I'm not too worried about it for myself. Also, I had a really good talk with my mom's friend, the CEO. He shared something pretty amazing with me. Before my mom passed away, she talked to him about looking out for me, and he remembered that. He told me that if I ever needed an internship to make some money, or even just a job in general, he'd always be willing to help me out. That was really cool to hear. It's comforting to know that even though my mom isn't here anymore, she made sure that there were people ready to support me. It makes me feel like she's still watching over me, making sure I'm okay. That thought really makes me happy, and I'm definitely going to keep his offer in mind as I think about what I want to do in the future.